top-rated radio personality. He's been featured on television. Action movie star. On the cover of magazines. Played drums with Stone Temple Pilots. Was asked to try out for the Seattle Kraken. Pro wrestler. Indie wrestling's first ever #verified champ. Defeated Danhausen, Ethan Page, Warhorse, and many more. Holy shit! What hasn't he done? Oh, and he's now Wrestling with Regret's YouTube champion. He's wrestling's true Renaissance man. Verified Steve Miggs. And he's f***ing awesome. Steve Miggs will be in Dallas for Mania weekend and available for bookings. Contact imstevemiggs@gmail.com to get Wrestling with Regret's YouTube champion on your show.
Hey, let's do it for the content. McMahon. Let's go. Let's get it. Dick Kick City. It gets gritty when McMahon come through. The kid gets busy. Work yourself into a shoot, but you know it's legit. Like what you like, just don't be a dick. Hey, Wrestling with Regret. Let's get it. Yeah. What's that set? Maybe you should bottle it. Drink it and spray it on. Get Claude to model it. 8 years in, can't look back. Who else can make the little sweatsuits look whack? Wrestling with Regret. Let's get it. Yeah.
Well, folks, Valentine's Day may have come and gone, but believe me when I say love is still in the air. You might laugh at this, but when I think about love, I often think about wrestling. I mean, think about it. For many of us, wrestling may be our first love or our biggest love. You may have a love of certain wrestlers or matches. Some folks have found love through wrestling. And of course, there's all that on-screen romance. Yes, we've seen lots of love blossom in professional wrestling over the years. I'm not talking about the behind-the-scenes relationships, but the ones that strictly exist in kayfabe. The ones between a pair of performers playing a role like any other actor. Sometimes there's chemistry there, some kind of spark that makes you believe it could really work out, and well, sometimes there isn't. And with that in mind, I'm gonna rank them the top 14 worst on-air romances in wrestling history. The number this week is 14 because, you know, Valentine's Day was on the 14th, huh? And before anyone says his name, let me tell you right now, Kane's relationships are hereby retired on this channel. No Chyna, no Tori, no Lita, no Katie Vick. They've all been beaten into the ground and are not showing up on this list. Time to retire the number, folks. There may never be another quite like him. Let's begin. Number 14, Mark Henry and Mae Young. If you want a classic example of how vindictive WWE can be with their booking when they want to be, look no further than Mark Henry. The world's strongest man caught a lot of heat early in his career for his abilities and his conditioning, and after a while, the company's solution appeared to be, we'll make him get into shape or he'll quit trying. Thus, Sexual Chocolate. Given the nickname after his lust for Chyna reached uncomfortable levels, Mark spent months portraying a ladies' man / sexual addict, culminating in a relationship with old person Mae Young. Their exploits mostly included canoodling, boinking, and shtupping. Then Mae became pregnant, birthed a hand in one of wrestling's all-time bizarre bits, and got powerbombed through tables while Mark was sent back to developmental for a spell. It's certainly one of the weirdest pairings in professional wrestling, but I'm keeping it pretty low in the countdown because I'm not sure I would call it bad. I mean, give Henry credit for going along with the bit, probably saving his career in the process. Just think, if we didn't go through this, we might not have had the Hall of Pain or the Salmon Jacket. Number 13, Murphy and Aaliyah Mysterio. 2020 was a strange time for everyone, with lots of change and uncertainty. But two people in WWE who didn't have to worry about such volatility were Seth Rollins and Rey Mysterio, because that shit went on forever. The Rollins Mysterio program carried the Raw brand through much of that early pandemic era, featuring the exciting in-ring debut of Rey's son Dominic, and of course, yeah, tell us again about gory self-mutilation, guys. But the angle took a big twist near the end when Rey's 19-year-old daughter Aaliyah got caught up in the drama. We'd see her show care and compassion for Seth's disciple Murphy. Murph and Aaliyah eventually became star-crossed lovers, their love forbidden by a vengeful father and a meddling messiah. Until that November, when Murphy finally broke free from under Rollins' thumb, beat him in a match, proved his worth to Papa Ray, then he and Aaliyah were both taken off TV. The angle was dropped, Aaliyah was never seen again, and Murphy only made sporadic appearances in 2021 until his release. From the moment the angle began, people had their reservations. Some folks thought that the love storyline was an unnecessary addition to the Seth and Ray angle. Others couldn't see the chemistry between them, while most people criticized the massive age difference between the happy couple. I mean, even Murphy himself has said he was hesitant about kissing Aaliyah on camera because he was afraid of looking like a creep. It is annoying the angle was cut right at its emotional high point. Then again, maybe they were doing us all a favor. Number 12, Vince McMahon and the Divas. Back in the day, fans delighted in seeing the evil chairman Mr. McMahon try to sabotage our heroes only to end up with egg on his face. But far less entertaining was his decade-long obsession with casting himself as some kind of hulked-out Lothario. More Los, less Jose. It began with a classic storyline that began in late 2000 when Vince put his wife Linda in a catatonic state so he could snog Trish Stratus all the livelong day. He ultimately suffered for his transgressions at WrestleMania 17 when Shane, Linda, and even Trish herself got some payback. And as transparently self-glorifying as the whole thing was, at least it ended with a satisfying conclusion. The same could not be said for the alarmingly high number of public repeat offenses, however long or short. Whether it was making out with Tori Wilson on her first night of the job, getting a table dance from Stacy Keibler, tonsil hockey with Sable, canoodling with Candice Michelle, and so on and so forth, Vince's on-air flings became less captivating each time. Who would have guessed that horny old men were not best for business? Number 11, Paul and Katie Lee Burchill. Now this entry might be a little controversial because things between these two folks were only implied, but come on, we all know what was going on. Back in the mid-2000s, Paul Burchill found moderate success on the SmackDown brand as a swashbuckling pirate before being written off in the summer of 2007 after a Mark Henry beatdown. Burchill came to Raw the following February, minus the pirate gimmick, and now with his kayfabe sister Katie Lee by his side. Oh, well, that's nice and wholesome. A brother and sister who support each other, who have shared dreams, and that is some interesting body language for a pair of siblings.
The most beautiful man in the world, my big brother Paul.
Every brother loves to make his little sister happy.
Phew, boy, there's only one other place I've seen that kind of look shared between a brother and a sister. Apparently the angle was meant to be loosely based on Sarah Michelle Gellar and Ryan Philippe's characters in Cruel Intentions. But damn, at least Catherine and Sebastian were step-siblings, and given WWE's weird history of dancing around incest storylines for years, stay tuned folks, I guess it was finally time to pull the trigger on that again. Watching this angle unfold in real time was one of the first times in my life I seriously questioned my fandom. But just 2 weeks in, the storyline was shut down as WWE officially went PG. We'll never know how far they plan to go with the idea, but my guess would have been too far. Katie Lee has said in interviews she was told the angle would be treated with respect, which, what does that even mean in this context? Like, the Lannisters? But even if we're to believe that WWE could ever do a story about incest in a tasteful manner, I think it's a bigger stretch to assume that their fan base wanted any part of it. Hell, I'd rather see Pirate Paul again. Number 10, Colonel Parker and Sister Sherry. You could call this next entry a fall-winter romance, dipped in batter and fried up Southern style with a dash of amnesia thrown in for good measure. In 1995, the two managers represented a pair of teams warring over the WCW tag titles, Sherry with Harlem Heat, Parker with the Stud Stable. Parker began coming on to Sherry, who initially responded with violence. But in a 6-person tag match, Sherry bonked her head and got that special kind of amnesia usually reserved for the most outlandish soap operas, or WCW apparently. Upon waking up, Sherry suddenly became infatuated with the Colonel and the romance was on. In grand wrestling tradition, things peaked with a good old-fashioned wedding outside the Little White Chapel in Las Vegas. But as the couple began to exchange their vows, in came Medusa to crash the nuptials, because as it turned out, Medusa was Parker's kayfabe bride first.
I did the right thing. It's not like we're not married.
If you're already married, you can't get married again.
Sherry soon took time off to go to rehab, which, considering she showed up to those wedding segments wiggity wasted, maybe wasn't such a bad idea. But when she returned, it was the end of the honeymoon period as she and Parker were back to being at odds until they both faded away from WCW television. Number 9, Daphne and David Flair and Miss Hancock. Poor David Flair, the son of the Nature Boy, may not have been blessed with the same athletic prowess as his stepsister Ashley, but boy did WCW give him that Flair push nonetheless. After months of being booked way out of his depth with the NWO Elite and as a heavily protected US champion, young David went off the deep end and found solace in his new friends Daphne and Crowbar. Eventually, David dumped his screaming siren, leaving her for Miss Hancock. Keep in mind, this is the same guy who dated Tori Wilson earlier in his career. Can you believe this asshole? The love triangle culminated in a wedding gown match at Bash at the Beach 2000, one of the worst matches on one of the worst shows from one of the worst years of WCW's existence. Never forget how hard it was for the crew of this multi-million-dollar company to clean off all that cake. Some months later, Miss Hancock would fight Major Guns in a pool of mud where we learned that she was pregnant, just not with David's kid. Before the mystery could be solved, the angle was abruptly cut short without a resolution, until the final days of the company when Stacy Keibler revealed she was the proud mama of a stack of Shawn Stasiak 8x10s. Truly a bundle of joy. The storyline produced some jaw-droppingly silly content and proved that even the less good Flairs can still live up to part of their family legacy. Number 8. Val Venis and his co-stars. If there's a record for the most time in a single year a wrestler's willy got him into trouble, then it would have to go to the porn star turned wrestler Val Venis. Seriously, after debuting in the spring of '98, his first run of storylines boiled down to man sleeps with the wrong woman, pays dearly for it, repeat. First, he made a film with Mrs. Yamaguchi-san, wife of Kaientai's manager, a move that almost cost him his Johnson in that infamous choppy choppy your pee-pee moment. Then later that year, Val stole Terry Runnels away from Dustin Rhodes, ultimately leading to the return of Goldust and the debut of Shattered Dreams. Ouch. Then finally, old Val played the ultimate head game with Intercontinental Champion Ken Shamrock by making a similar move with his storyline sister, Ryan. Val would go on to unceremoniously dump Terry and Ryan, which in turn would lead to the creation of the female stable PMS, which then led to the debut of their sex slave Meat, which was a pretty terrible gimmick. So thanks Val Venis for all that. Now I've made 2 Shawn Stasiak references in one video. What the hell? Number 7. Chaz and Mariana. Beaver Cleavage. I'm kind of shocked I haven't talked much about this particular gimmick on the channel, but I mean, how could I not? This is some peak Russo shit. It's right up my alley. Way back in the summer of 1998, fans began seeing grainy black and white vignettes in the style of Leave It to Beaver. The former headbanger Mosh, now Beaver Cleavage, performed in a series of sketches with Mama Cleavage featuring some implied incest that was somehow less subtle than when the Burchills did it.
Does Mother's little hairy beaver want some of Mother's milk?
But that's not the relationship we're talking about here. We're talking about what happened next. The gimmick died almost as soon as it appeared live on TV, and soon Beaver was going by his real name Chaz, Mama Cleavage his girlfriend Mariana. And after flirting with an incest storyline, why not just ruin any chance of success these two would have by taking a hard left to domestic abuse? After a while, Mariana would come to the ring sporting bruises and accusing Chaz of hitting her, which led to a lot of beef between he and the boys despite his pleas of innocence. Finally, on an episode of Sunday Night Heat, Thrasher came back from out of nowhere to reveal some GTV footage of Mariana applying makeup to make it look like she had gotten beaten up, and justice was served. Then Mariana was taken off TV, the headbangers reunited, and this crap was never mentioned again. Boy, after an incest angle and an abuse angle, I'm kind of surprised Chaz and Mariana avoided the hat trick and weren't saddled with an abortion storyline as well. Number 6. Edge and Vickie Guerrero. Edge had already used romance in the past to further elevate his career, but this time he took it a step further by seducing the widow of a beloved legend. The romance between Edge and Vickie was sandwiched between 2 wrestling weddings. After SmackDown GM Teddy Long suffered a heart attack at the altar, Vickie Guerrero was named Long's replacement. She immediately got to work by punishing Edge with the world title match at Armageddon 2007, which he would win. From there, the cat was out of the bag, and Edge and Vickie's love could finally be out in the open, this gender-swapped version of the classic gold digger trope. The fact that Vickie's actions were being portrayed as disrespectful to the name she married into only made the union even more hated and uncomfortable for some to sit through. But the perfect union fell apart in the summer of 2008. Edge and Vickie were set to be married in the ring on SmackDown, only for Triple H to spoil another wedding by showing footage of Edge smooching a debuting Alicia Fox. Vickie went on to spend months making Edge's life a living hell as the general manager of SmackDown until they got back together at that year's Survivor Series, then split up again after WrestleMania when Vickie resigned as the GM of Raw, and Edge made it clear that because she no longer had any power, he no longer had a reason to stay married to her. In the end, it was just another way to insult Vickie, which was always in season during this time.
Do you honestly think these people thought I could honestly be in love with a she-beast?
While the romance had its moments, it was just too unbelievable and contrived in so many ways, one of which being that Vickie hadn't caught on sooner. I mean, she was with the rated R superstar, for God's sake. It was also an example of the company going back to what had worked before and just recasting the roles, as a lot of this felt like a poor man's McMahon-Helmsley regime, with more fat shaming. Number 5. Brooke Hogan and Bully Ray. It's no surprise that Hulk Hogan used his power in Impact Wrestling to get his friends a gig, but perhaps even more egregious was getting his daughter Brooke hired to share gobs of TV time with him. After dumping a fair amount of money into her failed attempt at becoming the next Britney Spears, the Hulkster deemed it worth a try to recoup some of those funds by testing her marketability in the wrestling world. Brooke's welcome into the company was harmless enough as she was named the general manager of the Knockouts. I mean, she looked over that division figuratively and literally. Several months went by, the Aces and Eights storyline was getting more intense every week, and suddenly it was revealed by Austin Aries that Brooke had secretly been dating Bully Ray for some time. You can imagine how upset Hulk was that his little girl was dating a wrestler. I mean, if she was going to date one of the boys, why not somebody who's 8 feet tall and a millionaire? Too soon? As I mentioned in my look back at Aces and Eights, the story saw Bully, who was a senior in high school when Brooke was born, slowly gain the trust of the Hulkster as he continued to lead the charge against the invading biker gang. Then we got the big wedding that was crashed, all leading to Lockdown 2013, when Bully showed his true colors and revealed himself as the leader of A's and E's all along. I gotta give Bully and Brooke credit for eventually overcoming their noticeable lack of chemistry, but after the big reveal, you just gotta wonder what the point was of having Brooke in this role. My theory is that Brooke was kind of a stupid buffer for Hulk, because you see, brother, the Hulkster, he could see what was coming with Bully Ray, Jack. He saw the dagger coming, dude, but then he saw his daughter with his doe-eyed love for this wrestler pulling the do-rag over his eyes, brother. Though the first 2 acts of the Aces and Eights angle were some of Impact's best work at the time, the sad truth is it was derived from other storylines. The top heel marrying the boss's daughter to get ahead, Triple H and Stephanie. Big takeover angle, the New World Order. The Bully Ray reveal, higher power all the way. Well, hey, I didn't say they were all good storylines. The whole Bully Ray Brooke romance is a microcosm for the love affair with a past that wasn't even their own, and that special kind of nepotism that can risk bringing a company down if not handled properly. Number 4, AJ Lee and Daniel Bryan and CM Punk and Kane and John Cena. For much of her in-ring career, AJ Lee had to put up with a lot of crap. It's bad enough to be dealing with bipolar disorder in real life while also being booked as the crazy girl on TV, but how much of a mind warp is it to go from being told from the beginning that higher-ups had deemed her unfuckable to spending a year just swapping boyfriends? AJ first hitched her wagon to Daniel Bryan, which led to a lot of memorable moments between them, some entertaining, some a little hard to watch. Her kiss sealed Daniel's fate at WrestleMania 28 in that infamous 18-second match with Sheamus, causing Debra to dump her. As the crazy gimmick began to settle in, AJ would pursue CM Punk and even Kane briefly to get into Bryan's head as the three were feuding over the WWE Championship. By Money in the Bank 2012, a bizarre unrequited love triangle between Bryan, AJ, and Punk overshadowed anything having to do with the title, which is too bad because how do you screw up a championship feud between CM Punk and Daniel Bryan? Side note, the irony of CM Punk rejecting AJ here, knowing how they turn out in the future? Mwah! AJ and Bryan got back together and were raring to get married on Raw 1000. But before the happy couple could make it official, Mr. McMahon offered AJ the role of general manager for reasons, and she accepted, leaving Daniel at the altar in the process. Ah yes, the GM era of AJ's run. She had the gig from late July to mid-October, but aside from putting Daniel and Kane in anger management class, I'd be hard-pressed to tell you any other notable positives about her time in charge, but that's for a whole other video. Anyway, this clearly memorable run was cut short after it was alleged in storyline that Lee was fraternizing with John Cena. But I mean, hey, who doesn't want a piece of the Peacemaker? Lee resigned from her post and tried pursuing Cena further, who resisted her charms. Finally, she landed on Dolph Ziggler as her ultimate beau. It was a long and at times agonizing journey to get to this point, but at least AJ's pot at the end of the rainbow was a then record Divas Championship reign. Number 3, Dawn Marie and Al Wilson. This one feels familiar. Didn't I talk about this one recently? Yep, that's the one. Sorry, not much new insight to add this time around. And I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't more overlap between the two countdowns, if I'm being honest. Number 2, John Cena, Eve, and Zack Ryder. It's no secret that I'm a big fan of Matt Cardona and his current run in Game Changer Wrestling. I think like 3 of my last 4 videos have made some kind of reference to him, but that was not my intention. It just feels like he's kind of relevant at the moment. Cardona is undergoing a career renaissance as the anti-hardcore, pro-WWE style veteran who defies everything GCW stands for and appears to be having the time of his life doing it. He's finally getting a chance to let his creativity shine, a far cry from how things used to be in his career. Despite getting next to no TV time, Ryder's popularity in WWE was at an all-time high in 2011, thanks to his popular YouTube series Z True Long Island Story. The man had gotten himself over, something he and his colleagues were repeatedly told they had to do to make it in wrestling, and he was swiftly punished for it. Along with finally claiming the US title at Armageddon, Zach was also in an on-air relationship with Eve Torres, but then came in a very spooky return to TV. Okay, I know I said earlier I was done talking about Kane's relationships, but these ones don't count, right? I mean, he's a side character and these ones at best. Kane stalked and repeatedly beat the hell out of Ryder, who it's worth pointing out was originally meant to be a perfectly capable wrestler. Kane moidalized the bum so badly he lost the US title and ended up in a wheelchair. And then to top it all off, Zach's lady friend Eve had enough of him being a loser and fell into the waiting arms of Kane's real enemy, John Cena. Not only was Ryder made to look helpless and hapless in the storyline, but stupid too. Ryder would forgive Eve for messing around with Cena, only to take a trip to Dick Kick City at WrestleMania 28. It was crazy to see him fall so hard and look so hapless so quickly, but it felt like an appropriate moment for a guy whose biggest crime was becoming popular without an explicit push from WWE. And we wonder why he has a chip on his shoulder today. Before we reveal the happiest couple of all, or maybe it's more than that actually, here are a few honorable mentions. The Rock and Trish Stratus. Hall of Famer Trish Stratus was paired up with a lot of different men in her career, both in platonic roles and romantic ones. But of all the guys she shared screen time with, I think The Rock was the one I just couldn't get behind. I mean, it makes sense on paper. The Rock and Trish were the biggest male and female stars in WWE by late 2001, and what else do you get when you put two huge stars together aside from the ultimate power couple? Well, for starters, ever since breaking away from the Nation and then later the Corporation, The Rock was never the sort of act that played well with others. By the time he turned face in '99, the Great One was simply on a different stratosphere, no pun intended, from everyone else, that the idea of him in any kind of relationship felt like a betrayal to his brand, even if he talked about poontang pie every week. Rocky and Trish did have a certain level of chemistry, but nothing that felt genuine or like they were really into each other. Plus, the relationship, if you want to call it that, was so brief it was pretty forgettable. I mean, a simple search on Google doesn't come up with much about it apart from whether or not they relationshipped. QT Marshall and Aaliyah. In its relatively brief existence, AEW hasn't done too many romantic angles, but this one definitely hops into mind. In 2020, the Bunny stopped managing the Butcher and the Blade and began hanging out with the Nightmare family instead, which is weird they let her join since she debuted as part of a Cody Rhodes beatdown. Soon Aaliyah began linking up with coach QT Marshall. Theirs was an enthusiastic pairing, albeit a little hard to believe since it was relatively well known that Aaliyah and the Blade were married. The couple's antics existed almost exclusively on Dark and didn't really go anywhere before Aaliyah suddenly ditched QT without cause to rejoin the Butcher and the Blade, admitting she was just using Marshall for his money. I'm sure it was fun while it lasted to somebody. Steve Austin and Debra. Remember when Debra was actually going to be a third party in that Rock-Austin match at WrestleMania 17 before they nixed the idea about a week later? While she ended up being a non-factor, some theorized she was meant to be the catalyst for Austin's heel turn at the event, a theory that gained traction when Debra ended up becoming part of Stone Cold's act after the pay-per-view. Despite being a legitimate married couple, I always found their on-screen chemistry to be a little off. Then again, that might be because Debra was never a good talker and Steve can only do so much with what he's given. And aside from that, it further confused fans as to who the hell this new Steve Austin was. The man who thought nothing of delivering stunners to everyone from Stephanie McMahon, to Chaz, to Lita, to Santa Claus, was letting Debra hit him with a cookie tray and order him to defend her honor? Austin's supposed to be incapable of love. The only thing that could warm his icy veins is a case of Steve Weisers. And to make things even stranger, the post-Survivor Series 2001 reset saw Austin go back to good old Stone Cold and Debra written off TV entirely. For someone who was supposedly so important to Austin's character development and storyline, it was very strange that this on-air relationship suddenly evaporated the way it did. Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch. Now separately, Seth and Becky are two of the most entertaining, dynamic performers in all of WWE. But together, The year was 2019. Becky Lynch was riding high off an incredibly successful run, which included main eventing WrestleMania 35. Her real-life husband, Seth Rollins, had just beat Brock Lesnar in the Mania opener to win the Universal title. Both were in need of a landmark storyline as the new champions, but who would have guessed they would have found it in each other? Mr. freaking Rollins was challenged for his title by Baron Corbin, so right off the bat things were dicey. But when Lacey Evans was suddenly brought in to try and help Corbin win, that drew the ire of her recent rival in Lynch. The two storylines briefly merged, which allowed the recent newlyweds to share some painfully awkward screen time with each other.
Bex, tell him I'm not impulsive.
The couple won their winner-take-all match at Extreme Rules, which did neither of them any favors, then stopped interacting on screen entirely almost immediately afterward, a la Stone Cold and Debra. But let's see Debra take the end of days, huh? And my pick for the worst on-air romance in wrestling is Lana and anyone not named Rusev. WWE is the land of opportunity, sunshine, and rainbows. The place where dreams come true, where the goal is to make the audience walk away from every show with a big, bright, shining smile on their faces. And when you see the lengths this company went to humiliate a happy couple in the name of content, God, doesn't it just make you want to grin? Many years ago, CJ Perry and Miro met at the WWE Performance Center, started a relationship, and fell in love. They worked on screen together as Lana the Ravishing Russian and her charge the Bulgarian brute Rusev. And for a while, everything seemed hunky-dory. But when it was rumored that WWE saw superstar potential in Lana, that meant it was time to make Rusev the Mark Mero to his girlfriend's Sable. Shortly after losing the US title at WrestleMania 31 and his feud with John Cena, Rusev took his frustrations out on Lana and eventually dumped her. But within hours, Lana fell into the waiting arms of Dolph Ziggler. An absolutely inane couple of months followed, where Rusev brought in Summer Rae as a Lana clone, and Lana started to wear denim. Truly, it was a weird time. However, counterpoint, Rusev did give Summer Rae a fish.
Take it, take it. Take the fish.
The thing was, nobody bought into this love rectangle because they all knew that Lana and Rusev were a solid couple IRL, and that these new TV pairings had all the chemistry of peanut butter and piss. Then in the middle of all this stupidity, Lana and Rusev made things even weirder when they publicly announced their engagement, blowing everything up in the process and forcing the company to kill the angle. In the short term, it relieved fans of having to see any more of that awkward acting, but in the long run, it spelled the beginning of the end for the couple in WWE. After he was prevented from capitalizing on the massive popularity of Rusev Day, Ruru got back with Lana, but came nowhere near the heights of their last run together. After Aiden English alleged that he and Lana hooked up in a hotel room only for it to be revealed that he was lying, the couple was put to the test again when Lana began to hook up with Bobby Lashley. I've already dedicated way too much time on the angle since 2019, and at this point I'm ready to retire it right along with Kane's escapades. At least Lashley and Miro managed to escape the insanity relatively unscathed. However, counterpoint, the Lana-Lashley wedding was pretty funny. Whether intentional or no, WWE seemed dead set on punishing this couple for simply existing, especially after their engagement that derailed what I'm sure would have been a money angle by that year's SummerSlam. The fact that CJ and Miro are still together after being put through so much crap makes me think these kids are in it for the long haul, and only exacerbates why these relationship storylines involving Lana were the worst on-air romances in wrestling. Well, lovebirds, I know I missed a few bad romances in this countdown. Tell, don't kiss in the comment section below. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.